My name is Ronald T, and I want to confess what happened on Kane Island. I won't rush ahead. It's better if you listen to the whole story first. I was sitting alone in my office late on a Monday evening when the call came in. The building was quiet, almost reverent, as if it knew better than to interrupt me. The city outside the windows was dark and obedient. Its lights stretched beneath me like a map of everything I had already conquered. I don't usually take calls that late, and almost no one can reach me on that channel. It wasn't a normal line. No carrier, no routing numbers, no polite digital chimes. A closed channel. Old technology. Clean technology. A line that existed only for people who understood the value of silence. Only a handful of names were allowed to use it. That's why, when it rang, I already knew whoever it was mattered. I picked up without greeting. "Ronald?" the voice said, calm and familiar. "Still working?" I smiled before I realized I was doing it. Jerry Kane. An old friend. A dangerous one, if I was being honest with myself. The kind of man people described indirectly, through pauses and lowered voices. The owner of things that didn't officially exist. "Business doesn't sleep," I replied. "You know that." Jerry chuckled softly. "Neither do I. How are things? Markets treating you well?" We exchanged the usual updates. Numbers, projects, names that would mean nothing to anyone outside a very small circle. It was the ritual part of the conversation, the polite fencing before the real strike. Then Jerry stopped circling. "I'm calling to invite you," he said. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. "Invite me where?" "To my island." He didn't need to say the name. Kane Island. I had heard about it long before that call. Everyone in our world had. Not from articles or reports, those never mentioned it, but from dinners that went quiet at the wrong moment, from men who smiled too carefully when the topic came close. A private island, no phones, no names, no records. A place where people like us could disappear for a few days without the world noticing or caring. "You still host those gatherings," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I host privacy," Jerry corrected. "The gatherings are just a side effect." I stood up and walked toward the window. My reflection followed me. A confident man, broad in the shoulders, heavier than I used to be, my hair catching the light in that unmistakable copper shade people always commented on. I looked like success. I had worked very hard to look like that. "I know the rules," I said. "No leaks, no witnesses, no mistakes." "Exactly," Jerry replied. "Total anonymity. Total discretion. Once you land, the outside world stops existing." I paused. Truthfully, I had been waiting for this invitation longer than I cared to admit. Kane Island wasn't a place you asked to visit. Asking meant you didn't understand it. You were either invited or you weren't worth the risk. And I was tired. Tired of cameras. Tired of headlines pretending they knew me. Tired of every private moment becoming public property. I missed the feeling of control, the older kind, the kind you didn't need to announce. "How long?" I asked. "3 nights," Jerry said. "Come alone. No entourage, no identifiers. I'll take care of everything." I closed my eyes for a brief second. Somewhere deep inside, a quieter voice asked whether this was a good idea. I ignored it. I had ignored worse voices before. "I've heard stories," I said carefully. Jerry's tone didn't change. "Stories are what people invent when they're not invited." I laughed. "You always had an answer." "And you always liked the edge," he replied. "That's why this place exists." The line went quiet for a moment, not disconnected. Waiting. I realized my heart was beating faster than usual. Not fear, anticipation. "Send me the coordinates," I said. "I'll come," Jerry exhaled, satisfied. "Good. A plane will be ready. Once you arrive, remember, no questions, no names, no past." Kane Island works only if everyone plays their role. The call ended. I stayed where I was, looking out at the city that suddenly felt farther away than it ever had before. At that moment, Kane Island was just a destination, a promise, a secret I hadn't yet earned. I had no idea it would become a confession. The flight to Kane Island didn't appear on any schedule one could access later. No logos on the plane, no tail number worth remembering, no familiar faces in the crew. Even the sky felt different once we crossed a certain invisible line. Quieter, as if it too had signed a non-disclosure agreement. When we descended, the island rose from the water like a private thought. Green, precise, manicured without looking desperate. A long strip of land cut clean through the trees, ending in a runway that looked as if it had been ironed into existence. The plane rolled to a stop, and the engines died without ceremony. I stepped down the stairs and felt the air change immediately. Warmer. Thicker. It smelled like salt and money. They were already waiting. The staff stood in a neat line a few steps away from the runway. Men and women dressed simply, uniformly, with the kind of posture you don't teach, only select for. Faces neutral, eyes lowered, hands folded. A welcoming committee designed not to be remembered. I scanned them out of habit. It's something I do without thinking. Reading rooms, measuring people, deciding who matters and who doesn't. That's when it happened. For less than a second, one of them looked up. Our eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. No slow motion, no music, no lightning strike. Just a clean, accidental collision. His gaze was clear, almost disarmingly so, framed by a face that looked impossibly young for a place like this. Youthful in a way that wasn't naive, just unprotected. Like he hadn't yet learned how to build the walls everyone else on the island seemed to carry so naturally. He looked at me as if he recognized something, or maybe as if he didn't care who I was supposed to be. Then he looked away. I felt it in my chest before my mind caught up. A small, sharp awareness, the kind that irritates you precisely because it shouldn't matter. "Ronald?" a familiar voice said behind me. I turned. Jerry Kane stood a few steps back, smiling like a man, greeting his own reflection. He looked exactly as I remembered, impeccably dressed, relaxed, eyes alert behind the friendliness. The kind of man who never appeared, rushed because time moved around him, not the other way around. We shook hands. Firm, controlled, familiar. "You made it," he said. "I don't miss invitations like this," I replied. He gestured toward the island. "Welcome to Kane Island." The staff bowed their heads slightly as we passed. No names, no introductions, just presence and function. As we walked by, I felt that same awareness again, the sense of being watched without being stared at. I didn't look back. Not yet. Jerry led me toward a black vehicle waiting at the edge of the runway. As we got in, he glanced at me sideways, amused. "You always notice everything," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Do I?" "You were scanning the staff like they were a boardroom," he replied. "Relax. They're part of the island. That's all." The car began to move, silent over the smooth road, cutting through dense greenery. The trees leaned inward, creating a tunnel that felt intentionally isolating. I saw one of them look up. I said casually, "Not very anonymous behavior." Jerry smiled, unbothered. "They're human. It happens." "Very young," I added, keeping my tone light. Unusual choice for a place like this. Jerry didn't answer right away. The road curved, sunlight breaking through the leaves in rhythmic flashes across the windshield. "Everyone here is selected carefully," he said finally. "For discretion, for loyalty." "For looks?" I asked. He chuckled. "You haven't changed." "No," I said. "I've just learned to ask better questions." The vehicle slowed as the trees opened into a wide clearing. The estate appeared gradually. White stone, clean lines, glass reflecting sky and water, balanced between luxury and restraint. It didn't scream wealth. It whispered it. As we pulled up, staff moved into place seamlessly, opening doors, carrying bags, guiding us inside. For a brief moment, as I stepped out, I caught sight of him again at the edge of my vision. The same young face. Head lowered. Stillness practiced, but imperfect. This time I didn't look away. Neither did he. Jerry clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Come," he said. "We have a lot to talk about." As we entered the estate, the doors closing softly behind us, I felt the island settle around me like a lock clicking shut. And somewhere between the runway and that first step inside, I understood, without knowing why, that the island had already noticed me too. Jerry's estate was designed to impress without begging for admiration. High ceilings, wide corridors, walls that carried no art but somehow didn't feel empty. Everything had been chosen to say one thing: nothing here was accidental. We walked side by side through the main hall, our footsteps soft against polished stone. Staff appeared and disappeared at the edges of my vision. Efficient, silent, anonymous. No one spoke unless spoken to. No one lingered. I took it all in, then did what I always do when I enter someone else's territory. I started asking questions. "So," I said, loosening my tie as we moved deeper into the house, "what are the rules?" Jerry smiled as if he'd been waiting for that exact wording. "There's only one," he replied. "Anonymity." I stopped walking. "One rule?" I asked. "That's ambitious." Jerry turned to face me, his expression calm, almost instructional. "No names between guests, no phones, no recordings, no conversations that leave the island. What happens here stays here, not because people are afraid, but because they agree to it." "And if they don't?" I asked. "They don't come back," he said simply. "Most people understand the value of silence once they've experienced it." We resumed walking. I nodded slowly, absorbing the simplicity of it. In my world, rules were usually complicated on purpose, to hide who they benefited. This one was clean, dangerous in its honesty. "And the staff?" I asked. "Same rules apply, especially the staff," Jerry replied. "They're vetted more carefully than the guests. Loyalty is the real currency here." I thought back to the runway, to that brief moment of eye contact that hadn't followed any rule at all. "Interesting," I said, "because one of them looked directly at me when I arrived." Jerry glanced at me, curious but not alarmed. "Did that bother you?" "No," I said. "It surprised me." He chuckled. "You're not used to being surprised." "That's why I noticed." We entered a private sitting room overlooking the water. The ocean stretched endlessly beyond the glass, calm and unreadable. Jerry poured himself a drink and gestured for me to sit. "Which one was it?" he asked, casual. I took the glass he handed me, but didn't drink yet. "One of the younger ones," I said. "Very young-looking. Didn't fit the rest?" Jerry's eyes flickered for half a second, so quick most people wouldn't have caught it. I did. "They all fit," he said, "just in different ways." I leaned back in the chair, studying him now. He stood out. Jerry smiled again, but this time it was thinner. "You always had an eye for details that other people ignore." "Details matter," I said, "especially on islands." He raised his glass. "You'll find that Kane Island rewards curiosity, as long as it stays polite." I finally took a sip. The drink was perfect. Of course it was. "So tell me," I said, setting the glass down, "what exactly do you get out of all this, Jerry?" He looked out toward the ocean before answering. "Control," he said. "Not over people, over chaos. The world is loud, Ronald. Here it's quiet. People behave better when they know they're unobserved." I considered that. In my experience, people behaved worse when they thought no one was watching. But I didn't argue. "And the parties?" I asked. "I assume that's not just for decoration." Jerry laughed softly. "No, they're a release. A reminder. When you strip away names and consequences, people reveal who they really are. My mind drifted again, uninvited, to that young face. To the way his eyes hadn't held fear or ambition, just something open. Something unguarded. "Careful," Jerry said, watching me now. "You're thinking too loudly." I smiled. "I'm just settling in." He stood and straightened his jacket. "Good. The first gathering is tonight, nothing formal. Just an introduction." I rose as well. "And if I break a rule?" Jerry met my gaze. "You won't," he said. "You're too smart for that." As we left the room, staff moved silently to clear the glasses. I caught a glimpse of him again down the corridor. Head lowered, hands folded, posture perfect, except for the slightest tension in his shoulders. This time, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. He wasn't just part of the island. He was watching it. And somehow, without a single word exchanged, I knew my questions were only beginning. The first party began without an announcement. There was no invitation slid under my door, no schedule, no dress code. At some point after sunset, the house simply changed its rhythm. Lights softened. Music appeared, not loud, not demanding, just present enough to guide movement. People began to arrive in small, unremarkable groups, as if they had always been there and were only now deciding to be visible. Jerry was right about one thing. Names disappeared fast. Faces, however, did not. I recognized many of them. Not officially, of course. No one acknowledged who anyone was outside the island. But power has a look. Wealth has posture. Influence leaves fingerprints you don't need a name to identify. Media figures with trained smiles. Entrepreneurs who spoke in half sentences. Men who leaned too comfortably into luxury, as if they had earned the right to be careless. I moved through the space the way I always do. Confident, relaxed, letting people come to me. Conversations floated past without anchoring. Deals hinted at, but never defined. Laughter that carried just enough tension to remind everyone why secrecy mattered. I should have been enjoying it more than I was. Instead, I was searching. I noticed him near the edge of the room, partially obscured by a column. Still in staff attire, still performing his role, but less invisible now. He moved differently from the others, more aware, more present, youthful in a way that made the rest of the room feel heavier by contrast. At some point, our paths crossed. "Drink?" he asked quietly, holding out a glass. His voice was calm, steady, not rehearsed. He didn't look at me the way staff usually looked at guests. There was no submission there, no hunger either. "Thank you," I said, taking it. Our fingers brushed briefly. A mistake, or maybe the opposite. I felt the contact linger in my mind longer than it had in reality. He met my eyes for a fraction of a second, then turned away as if nothing had happened. I watched him go. Later, much later, or maybe only minutes. Time was unreliable on the island. I saw him again near one of the side corridors. Fewer people there, less noise. The music thinned, stretched, became background rather than command. "You shouldn't be standing here," I said, low enough that only he could hear. He glanced at me, expression neutral. "Neither should you." That surprised me. I smiled before I could stop myself. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a beat. "Names aren't important here," he said. "Then what is?" I asked. He considered that. "Attention," he replied, "and where you give it." I felt something shift between us then, something subtle but undeniable, an understanding that this was no longer accidental. "Walk with me," I said. He didn't answer right away. He looked down the corridor, then back at me. Somewhere behind us, laughter spiked. Glasses clinked. A song reached its chorus. Finally, he nodded. We didn't speak as we moved. The hallway led to a small room, unremarkable, intentionally so. No cameras, no decoration, a room designed to forget itself. The door closed softly behind us. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he stepped closer. I could see how young he looked up close, how untouched by calculation his face still was, how his eyes held curiosity rather than strategy. It unsettled me more than it should have. "This is a bad idea," I said. He smiled faintly. "Most honest ones are." I leaned in before my mind could interfere. The kiss was brief, restrained, almost cautious. A test, not a claim. His lips were warm, responsive. When we pulled apart, there was no rush, just a shared stillness, heavy with things left undone. A knock sounded on the door. Reality reasserted itself. We stepped back, composed ourselves. He straightened his clothing with practiced ease. I adjusted my jacket, feeling the echo of him linger where the kiss had been. Before opening the door, he looked at me once more. "This doesn't leave the room," he said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." We exited separately. The party continued as if nothing had happened. Conversations resumed. Faces blurred. The island hummed on. But I knew then, without doubt, that the first rule of Kane Island had already been tested, and I had been the one to test it. By the time the second party began, I already knew I wouldn't be alone that night. The island had changed its posture. Not in any obvious way, no louder music, no reckless excess, but in the subtle tightening of space. People stood closer, laughter carried less distance. Even the air felt warmer, heavier, as if Kane Island itself was holding its breath. I felt it in my body before I admitted it to my mind. I found him without searching. Or maybe I had been searching all along and simply didn't want to call it that. He stood near the edge of the gathering, half turned away from the noise, watching rather than serving. When our eyes met, there was no surprise this time, only recognition. I approached him slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I didn't want to rush what had already begun to take shape between us. "You're quieter tonight," I said. "So are you," he replied. We didn't touch, not yet, but the space between us was already doing the work for us, narrowing, charged, attentive. Without speaking, he turned and walked toward the far corridor. I followed. No one stopped us. No one needed to. On Kane Island, privacy was a language everyone spoke fluently. The room we entered felt different from the others. Less functional, more intentional, soft light. Curtains drawn just enough to forget the hour. The door closed, and with it, the last echo of the party dissolved. We stood there for a moment, facing each other. Then the distance finally disappeared. What followed didn't unfold in a straight line. There was no urgency, no clumsiness. It was a gradual surrender of control. Layers set aside one by one, carefully, as if each of us understood the weight of what we were offering. Hands learned before words did. Breaths adjusted. Time stretched, then lost its shape entirely. At some point, the island faded. Not vanished, just retreated. The rules, the walls, the careful anonymity all stepped back, giving us space to exist without performance, without titles, without witnesses. I remember the quiet most of all, the way silence settled between us without demanding to be filled. The way he stayed close even when nothing was happening, as if distance itself had become unnecessary. The way my own thoughts slowed, unburdened by calculation. Hours passed. Or minutes. It didn't matter. When I finally rested my hand against his back, feeling the steady reassurance of him there, something unfamiliar stirred in me. Not triumph, not conquest, but something softer and far more dangerous. Presence. At dawn, light crept into the room gently, almost apologetically. The world reintroduced itself piece by piece. Reality didn't crash back in. It waited. He moved first, careful not to wake me, though I was already awake. I watched him dress, noticing how the night had changed the way he carried himself. Not heavier, just aware. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "This doesn't happen often here," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "It doesn't." "But it happened," he said. He didn't wait for an answer. When the door closed, I lay there longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling, feeling the echo of him linger in the room and in me. I told myself it was contained, that Kane Island was built for moments like this, to absorb them, erase them, leave no trace. I believed that because it was convenient. I didn't yet understand that some nights don't disappear. They wait. The feeling didn't arrive all at once. It crept in. At first, it was nothing more than a shift in rhythm. The island still moved with the same polished precision, the same effortless discretion, but I began to notice delays. Half a second too long when I entered a room. A glance held just a breath beyond politeness. The staff remained silent, efficient, composed, and yet something about their stillness had changed. It wasn't fear, it was attention. I told myself I was imagining it. I was tired, overstimulated, out of my usual environment. Kane Island had a way of distorting perception. Jerry had warned me of that in his own way. But the longer I stayed, the harder it became to dismiss the sense that I was no longer just a guest. I was being observed. It started small. A tray paused near a doorway when I spoke, a corridor that emptied too neatly just before I entered it. Reflections in glass that didn't move when I expected them to. Once, as I crossed the terrace, I caught the faint glint of something metallic where there shouldn't have been anything at all. I stopped walking. The glint vanished. I laughed quietly at myself. Paranoia was an occupational hazard in my world. I had enemies, rivals, people who would benefit from a mistake. But this was Kane Island. Jerry's rules. Jerry's guarantees. Still, the feeling followed me. That night, during dinner, I noticed how conversations nearby softened whenever I spoke. Not stopped, shifted, as if the room was listening through the people rather than to them. The staff moved flawlessly, but I could feel the island tracking motion, mapping presence. And then there was him. He was more careful now. Too careful. Our eyes no longer met accidentally. When they did, it was brief, guarded, as if we were both pretending the night before had been a shared dream rather than a memory. He stayed closer to the walls, moved with intention. Avoidance, not indifference. That worried me more than attention ever could. I waited until the afternoon, when the heat pressed everyone into slower patterns, and found Jerry alone in his study. He was standing by the window, looking out at the water, a glass untouched in his hand. "You look like a man who's noticed the machinery," he said without turning around. I closed the door behind me. "You promised discretion." He turned then, calm as ever. "And you doubt me?" "I'm starting to," I replied. Jerry raised an eyebrow. "That's new." "I feel watched," I said plainly. "Not by guests, by the island." He smiled faintly. "Kane Island doesn't watch. It remembers." "That's not reassuring," I said. "It should be," he replied. "Memory is passive, observation is active." I stepped closer. "Are there cameras here, Jerry?" His expression didn't change. Not even slightly. "No." I studied him, searching for the smallest fracture in his composure. I found none. "No recordings, no archives, no leverage." He continued. "That's the entire point. If I broke that rule, the island would collapse. People come here because they trust me." "And the staff?" I asked. "They're everywhere." "They always have been," he said. "You're only noticing them now because something here matters to you." That landed harder than I expected. "You think this is about distraction?" I said. "I think," Jerry replied gently, "that you've confused privacy with invisibility. They're not the same thing." I held his gaze. "So you're telling me nothing is being captured, nothing is being stored?" "Yes," he said. "And I'm telling you that if something feels wrong, it's because you've stepped into unfamiliar territory, not because the rules have changed." I wanted to believe him. Jerry had never lied to me outright. He had simply mastered omission. "And the young one?" I added carefully. "The one from the staff." Jerry's eyes sharpened for the briefest moment. What about him? He's been avoiding me. Jerry exhaled, amused. Smart. That wasn't an answer. No, Jerry agreed. It was advice. Silence settled between us, heavy but not hostile. You're safe here, Ronald, Jerry said at last. Safer than anywhere else you could be right now. I nodded, even as something in my chest tightened. Because safety shouldn't feel like this. That evening, alone in my room, I stood by the mirror longer than usual, studying my reflection. I looked the same. Powerful. Composed. Untouchable. And yet, I had the distinct, unsettling sense that the island knew me better than I knew myself. That night, I slept lightly, and somewhere beyond the walls, Kane Island kept its secrets very close. He found me when I wasn't expecting it. Not at night. Not in secrecy, but in the late afternoon when the sun had flattened the island into something deceptively calm and ordinary. I was on the terrace outside my room, a glass untouched in my hand, pretending to read, while my thoughts kept circling the same quiet fear. I sensed him before I saw him. He stood a few steps away, just far enough to respect the illusion of distance. His posture was careful, his expression composed in the way people learn when they are about to say something that can't be taken back. We need to talk, he said. Not a request. A fact. I looked around instinctively, scanning for movement, for listening eyes. The terrace was empty. The island for once felt still. Here? I asked. He nodded. Now. I gestured toward the chair opposite me. He didn't sit. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his uniform jacket. The motion was small, controlled, but it set something off inside me, a warning I'd learned to trust long ago. He placed a phone on the table between us. I stared at it. Phones didn't exist on Kane Island. Jerry's rule. The rule. Where did you get that? I asked quietly. You already know, he replied. My throat tightened. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He unlocked the screen and turned it toward me. For a second, nothing registered. Just shapes, light, shadow. Then my mind caught up. The room. The light. The angle. Us. Not posed. Not staged. Caught in fragments. Movement. Closeness. Moments that should have belonged only to memory. The way my hand rested against him. The way he leaned into me without hesitation. Intimacy reduced to proof. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. How many? I asked. Enough, he said. I looked up at him then, really looked. His face was steady, but his eyes were not. There was no triumph there, no malice, only resignation. You knew, I said, from the beginning, he swallowed. Not like this, not with you. I pushed the phone back toward him, as if distance could undo what I'd seen. Who else has this? No one, he said quickly. Not yet. Yet, I repeated. He nodded. That's why I had to tell you. I stood, the chair scraping softly against stone. Jerry told me nothing was being recorded. He didn't lie, he said. He just didn't say everything. I laughed once. Short, humorless. Of course. The pieces slid into place with sickening clarity. The staff's attention. The glints. The pauses. Kane Island didn't need cameras everywhere. It only needed them where people forgot to be careful. Is this what you do? I asked. Get close. Gain trust. Collect. His eyes flashed. No! I believed him. That was the worst part. I was supposed to be invisible, he continued. That's what I was told. Watch. Don't interfere. Don't matter. And then? I asked. And then you looked at me like I was real. Silence stretched between us, thick and dangerous. They don't care about moments, he said softly. They care about leverage. Insurance. Control. I felt the weight of it then. Not fear for my reputation. Not even anger. Something heavier. Betrayal wrapped in intimacy. You should destroy it, I said. He shook his head. I can't. It's already out of my hands. I only have copies of what matters. Why tell me? I asked. Because you deserve to know what they'll try to use, he replied. And because I couldn't let you walk into it blind. I studied him for a long moment. This young, careful, impossible presence who had slipped past my defenses not with ambition, but with honesty. Jerry knows? I asked. He knows everything, he said. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the terrace. The island remained quiet, patient. I realized then that Kane Island had never been about escape. It was about exposure. Go, I said finally. Disappear, as much as this place allows. He hesitated. And you? I picked up the phone, feeling its weight like a verdict. I'll handle Jerry. He left without another word. I stood there alone, the sound of the ocean suddenly too loud, understanding at last what the island had been preparing me for. Not pleasure, not secrecy, leverage. I left the island before nightfall. There was no dramatic confrontation at the runway, no raised voices, no guards stepping into my path. Kane Island didn't need force. It worked on consent, on the quiet understanding that resistance was inefficient. My departure was handled with the same flawless politeness as my arrival. A car. A short drive through the trees. The runway waiting, clean and anonymous. No one said goodbye. As the plane lifted off, I looked down at the island for the last time. From above, it was perfect, orderly, serene, almost innocent. Nothing about it suggested what it was built to contain. That was Jerry's greatest skill, making danger look like comfort. The flight passed in silence. No announcements. No conversation. I replayed everything in my head, not with panic, but with calculation. Panic was for people without options. By the time the city came back into view, I had already decided what to do. 2 hours later, I was back in my office. Same desk. Same skyline. Same reflection in the glass. And yet, something had shifted. The man standing there was still powerful, still composed, but no longer untouched. I didn't wait long before initiating the call. The same closed channel. The same faint static. Jerry answered on the first signal. You left early, he said, as if commenting on the weather. I don't like surprises, I replied. He sighed lightly. You liked them well enough 2 nights ago. I ignored that. You told me nothing was being recorded. I told you there were no cameras, he said calmly. I was precise. You let your island collect leverage on me. I let the island do what it was designed to do, Jerry answered. You participated willingly. Silence stretched between us, heavy but familiar. We had spoken this language for decades. You won't release anything, I said. Jerry smiled on the other end of the line. I could hear it. I won't need to. You will, I replied. Because if anything from Kane Island ever surfaces, even indirectly, I make sure your island becomes very interesting to people who don't appreciate mystery. He chuckled softly. You always did know how to negotiate, and you always respected mutually assured silence, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Nothing leaves the island, Jerry said at last. Not now. Not ever. Good, I replied. Then we understand each other. We always have, he said. That's why you were invited. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair and looked at the city below. Life moved on, unaware of how close it had come to becoming something else entirely. Headlines would continue. Appearances would be maintained. Kane Island would remain a rumor. But not to me. What happened there didn't ruin me. It didn't expose me. It didn't even weaken me. It changed me. Because for the first time in my life, power hadn't been the most dangerous thing in the room. Trust had. And somewhere beyond the reach of phones and contracts, there was a very young man who had shown me the cost of forgetting that. This is my confession. Not because I was defeated, but because some stories don't disappear just because everyone agrees they should.